Have you ever wondered what would happen if Sasuke Uchiha from Naruto had a crossover with Sword Art Online or Log Horizon? I know I hadn't, but I do have the answer. My name is Graeldon and I'm reviewing Steam games in alphabetical order to find the hidden gems among the piles of garbage, and today we're reviewing the first game from .hack//GU Last Recode. .hack//GU Rebirth. Now heads up, this is going to be a long one, so make sure you've got a drink, get yourself settled in, and let's begin. If you're like me and hadn't heard of the .hack series before, let me try to shed a little bit of light on what's going on here, but keep in mind that I am also new to the series, so this is based on my best understanding. In a nutshell, this series is big, and definitely has dedicated fans. The series spreads over light novels, a few anime series, and multiple games, most of which were released on the PS2. What we're diving into is a remaster called .hack/GU Last Recode, which contains three main games: .hack/GU Rebirth, .hack/GU Reminisce, and .hack/GU Redemption, plus a brand new fourth title called .hack/GU Reconnection. The first of the three games was originally released on the PS2 in 2006 and has been remastered, released on Steam in 2017. The three main games are each roughly 20 hours in duration, while the fourth edition is only a few hours long, hence me calling it 3 and a bit games in one. For the sake of the series, we'll be splitting this title over multiple videos. Now, a few disclaimers. Firstly, because of how this series works, I have not gone back and played any of the other games in the .hack universe. This is my first exposure to the series, and when I started, I was intrigued to see how well the story of a game that branches over so many different mediums would land for someone with no prior knowledge of the .hack universe. Personally, I imagine this is what it feels like for someone trying out a Final Fantasy game for the very first time, knowing that it's a series with a huge history behind it, even if the individual games are not connected. Secondly, because the game was released on the PS2 originally, I'll be playing with a controller, but it's worth mentioning that the game does have keyboard and mouse controls. I also just prefer using a controller for most third-person games, it's just more comfortable. And finally, the majority of music in the game will result in copyright strikes on my channel, so I'll be limited with what content I can and cannot show for this review. With that out of the way, we can focus on the first in the trilogy, .hack/GU Rebirth. Upon launching the game, we're treated to a game selection screen, and I have to say this is really clean and wonderfully presented. There are icons for each game available and lovely illustrations on the left that showcase some of the main characters from each game. The options menu has some basic controller options, individual sound sliders for background music, sound effects, voices, and movies. The game can be played in English or Japanese. There are rebindable controls for keyboard and mouse, and some basic graphic settings. All in all, it's perfectly competent and has all the necessities, and it's easy to navigate. So far, so good. Rebirth follows the story of Haseo and his journey to form friendships by slowly becoming less of a dislikable teenager. We join him as he logs into the MMORPG called The World for the very first time. The intro cutscene is very anime-esque in that it would fit almost perfectly as the opening for an anime, including the fitting music, and this later turns out to be a very apt comparison. We're shown the main protagonist, Haseo, and given our first glimpse of the main city, Anu, the City of Twilight. Now, I've only had a couple of minutes with the game, and already it's evident that the devs, Bandai Namco, were pretty heavily influenced by Square Enix when making this game. Anu looks thematically similar to Kingdom Hearts 2 Twilight Town, and even the main menu for the game is visually similar to the Kingdom Hearts series. Upon arriving, Haseo is approached by two players, Asta and Ioten, who offer to help out Haseo, who is obviously new and doesn't know his way around yet. It's interesting to note that Ioten's name is in all capitals, an early nod towards the reality that most players in MMORPGs won't use real names. In fact, later on we'll see all manner of names, including Destruction Star and Soil. It's a nice touch that helps sell the illusion of it being an actual MMORPG where players are free to choose whatever names they like, and it feels very true to life. You see examples of this everywhere in the real world, including here on YouTube. I'm looking at you, Cheeseburger Freedom Man. Asta and Ioten teach Haseo about the party system and introduce him to the Chaos Gate, the portal that allows adventurers to travel to other towns, embark on quests, or travel to other areas, created through the game's unique word system. This is a rather clever but sadly underutilized system of creating somewhat randomized areas to adventure in by combining 3 words together. The particular words used will influence the area that is created, including the enemies and treasure to be found within it. For example, the starter area that Haseo is invited to uses the words courageous, engaging, and daydream to create a beginner-friendly level 1 area. This mechanic is used throughout the game, with additional words being received from completing quests, performing well when clearing an area, or even by talking to other players in-game or in the forums. Yes, this game has its own dedicated in-game forum. More on that later. During this opening sequence, it becomes evident that the voice acting is going to be pretty hit and miss, and unfortunately for the game, some of the worst voice acting is in the opening moments. For whatever reason, they decided that these sentences that ends with ellipsis should trail off and then pick up again when the next caption's displayed. Because I can't play the audio of the cutscenes, here's my interpretation of what it sounds like. Member addresses are short email addresses that you can only use in the world. Yeah, it's not great. As I said though, it does really improve later into the game. Why they didn't go back and re-record these lines, I don't know, but it is a bit jarring to say the least. And you can't even blame it on the voice actors. Ieten is voiced by Steve Blum, who voices Orochimaru in the Naruto dub, and Haseo is voiced by Yuri Lowenthal, the voice actor for Sasuke Uchiha. So these voice actors can definitely deliver solid performances, and I'm pleased to say that Yuri does an amazing job throughout .hack Rebirth, delivering a solid performance from start to finish, as do the majority of other voice actors. However, it's still difficult not to imagine that Haseo is actually being played by Sasuke, especially when he's yelling "Die!" at the enemies or laughing maniacally. It's my headcanon that this is Sasuke in an alternative universe where the Leaf Village invents full-body VR and Sasuke becomes addicted to games. One last thing to mention here is that there are several lengthy cutscenes that are fully animated and some in-game cutscenes that are just acted out using the character models and animations. These in-game scenes are also voice acted, but there aren't any mouth movements. This looks a bit strange, and I initially thought that it might be intentional to reflect the fact that they are likely communicating through typed text. But that doesn't make sense, as this is meant to be a VR MMO, and we clearly see them moving their mouths during the animated cutscenes. So it's an intentional choice, but an odd one. The part that makes it even stranger is that sometimes an in-game cutscene will be interrupted by an animated one for a line or two before going back to a regular cutscene. It's a choice that is a bit jarring at times, and I personally wish they'd stuck with either one or the other. To the game's credit, the animated cutscenes do a wonderful job of bringing the characters' personalities to life. I just wish it was more consistent. Anyway, the trio head into the area and we get an explanation of some of the basic concepts, including the map, area objectives, and combat. So, now is as good a time as any to explain combat. I'll preface this by saying that I both love and hate the combat system. Monsters are encountered in the field as you explore, and you can ambush them with a sneak attack to get first strike. To do this, simply approach them until a target cursor appears on them, and as long as they haven't spotted you, you can attack. Once the fight begins, a magical barrier will circle the area, preventing you or the enemies from fleeing unless you use a special item called Smoke Bomb to escape. Combat uses an auto lock-on system, and you can change targets with the D-pad, although I found this to be somewhat unreliable. You have a basic attack which can be chained together, or you can hold the attack button for a charged attack that will break through enemies that are defending. There are also skills which are split into attack magic, defensive magic, and weapon arts. These can be activated by opening the menu, which pauses the battle, or through a shortcut button, which spells and arts can be assigned to for quick access. To begin with, Haseo only has one art available, Gale Blade, which makes deciding which skill to use during the tutorial fight very difficult. Skills will consume SP, which can be replenished through items or by letting it slowly recharge over time. After using a skill, item, or charge attack, there is a short cooldown before another one can be used. This prevents you from simply spamming skills and constantly stun-locking your opponent, and adds in a bit of tactics to the fight, as skills will also act to interrupt your opponent's attacks. Additionally, if an enemy has been hit enough times in a row, they'll be put into a vulnerable state, turning your next attack into a Rengeki, dealing additional damage, and building up the morale gauge, which is used to provide massive buffs to your party. While this might sound like it's encouraging tactical use of your skills, unfortunately that's not quite the case, for two main reasons. Firstly, you learn additional skills as your weapon proficiency increases. How does your weapon proficiency increase? By using skills. So if you want to access the best skills, you'll spam your skills at every available opportunity. Secondly, because of how powerful Rengeki attacks are, usually managing to finish off your opponent, most combat involves spamming basic attacks until they're vulnerable and then using a Rengeki attack. By the time you've spammed the next target with basic attacks and made them vulnerable, your skill has recharged and you can land another Rengeki attack. Rinse and repeat. The final thing I'll mention for now is that you're able to give your party members some basic strategies to use, such as free will, rage, tenacity, or life, allowing you to instruct them on what to focus on. For the most part, I left my party members on free will and we only ran into difficulty once or twice, and that was resolved by switching one person to focus on healing for a short time. Overall, the combat reminds me of Tales of Symphonia, released on PS2 in 2004, another game that .hat may have drawn inspiration from. It sounds reasonably deep, but is in reality quite shallow, especially considering that the enemy AI is incredibly basic. After fighting through the first few enemy encounters and collecting the 3 symbol fragments from the conveniently placed chests, the temple unlocks and the trio head inside to collect the unique area treasure. Now, as I was playing through, I noticed that the player portrait for Eoten looks like this. Doesn't he just look like a friendly person that loves to help new players? Inside the temple, Haseo is instructed to open the chest. Upon doing so, he's immediately betrayed by Eoten and Uster with some incredibly menacing looking weaponry. It turns out that the pair of them are player killers, or PKers, and they enjoy luring noobs like Haseo into areas to be killed. Well, at least Haseo is experiencing the reality of mid-2000s online gaming the way I'm sure many of us did. I personally learned everything I know about trusting strangers on the internet from playing RuneScape. You learn your lesson after losing all your valuable items by being lured into the wilderness, that's for sure. This fight is really well animated, as are all of the cutscenes in the game, but it's so one-sided that I can't help but picture that scene of Sasuke pinned against the wall, utterly powerless. Once the fight is over, a new character, Ovan, intervenes, catching the 2 PKers off guard, literally blasting them off the edge and into the abyss. Small side note here, Ovan's character design with the red tinted sunglasses and wrapped arm make me think he's a combination of Barret from Final Fantasy VII and Auron from Final Fantasy X. Surely it's not just me. At this point, I hope you're comfy, because this scene is the first of a handful that make up a 20-minute non-stop cutscene sequence. The game fast forwards 8 months and we get treated to watching a fully leveled and geared up Haseo absolutely mop the floor with a group of PKers. Haseo has now become what is called a player killer killer, or PKKer, and earns the nickname the Terror of Death. He's on the hunt for someone called Tri-Edge. Why? Well, up until a couple of months ago, Haseo was part of a guild called the Twilight Brigade, and he, along with Ovan and another player called Shino, were on a mission to find a rare item called the Key of the Twilight, an artifact that is said to be able to grant any wish. Unfortunately, Shino was brutally murdered by a PKer while they were searching, and in a strange twist of events is now in a coma. The company behind the game, CC Corp, denied that there is any link, saying that it's merely a coincidence, but Haseo knows he saw something inexplicable on that day, and has been on a mission to track down the PKer responsible, Tri-Edge, ever since. After slaughtering the group of PKers, Haseo heads back to Mak'anu, where he bumps into 2 members of a guild called Moontree, Sakaki and Atali. Haseo is caught off guard because Atali looks exactly like Shino, and Sakaki explains that from time to time, players will share a character model. We learn a little bit about Moontree, namely that they are against the act of PKing and, by association, PKKing, and do not approve of Haseo's methods of dealing with PKers, instead looking for a more permanent, peaceful solution. Fun fact, Sakaki is voiced by Crispin Freeman, the English voice actor for Itachi Uchiha. This will be relevant later on. Haseo spots Ovan in the distance, and in a brief exchange learns that Tri-Edge will be revisiting the location where Shino was killed. Heading there, Haseo engages in a fight with Tri-Edge, and I have to say, this plays out wonderfully. We know from witnessing the previous fight that Haseo is incredibly powerful. He defeated multiple players with barely a scratch, and yet here, he fails to land a single blow against his opponent. In fact, Tri-Edge appears almost dismissive of his attacks, which is wonderful visual storytelling. The gap in power between the two is immediately obvious, and none of Haseo's tricks are working. The fight is so one-sided, in fact, that you could describe Haseo as basically getting deleted, which turns out to be pretty accurate. The final blow that Tri-Edge lands is something called Data Drain, and Haseo is forcibly logged out and returned to the game's main menu and browser system. As far as I can tell, this is a nod to the Play Online system that Final Fantasy XI used, and here it's used to access emails, browse forums and news sites that are updated with information as you progress throughout the game, and even play with the settings and background of the interface itself. Unfortunately, this attack has resulted in Haseo's character being reformatted and reverted back to level 1. Items, equipment, skills, friends list, and even his emails are all gone. Now, I don't know about you, but if I lost 8 months of progress, I'd probably uninstall the game and never go back. However, an email from Ovan piques Haseo's curiosity and he logs back in, determined to track down Tri-Edge even if it means starting all over again. All in all, it's a pretty good setup and character motivation for Haseo. The loss of a best friend, the struggle against an impossibly strong foe, and the mystery of how an in-game death could put someone into a real-life coma. Upon logging back into the game, Haseo ends up literally bumping into 2 players from a noob-friendly guild called Canard, Gasper and Syllabus. Haseo tries to explain that he's actually the terror of death, but they claim that's impossible with his level and stats, and they offer to take him under their wing and get him started on his journey in the world. Realizing it will be easier to level up in a group, Haseo accepts and they head off to an area. And this is where one of my biggest gripes with the game is. There is so much repetition. Just learned about a new system? Prepare to have it explained 3 times. Need to complete the next step in the mission? Yep, it'll be explained 3 times. Just read an email with instructions. Guess what gets repeated when you log into the game? And it doesn't end there. Even the areas, which feel like they should be a highlight of the game thanks to the creative word system, end up being a chore. This is largely due to the fact that there are only 3 tile sets available: small islands in a lake, an underground cave system, and Japanese-style buildings. Considering that the game makes you go into areas over and over again in order to level up, you'll have seen every possible area after only a couple of hours of gameplay. The enemies thankfully add some variety, however there are pros and cons to this as well. Areas typically only have 2 to 3 different enemies at once, and they are always in groups of 3. So for as long as you're in an area, you'll be fighting the same 2 to 3 monsters over and over again. Throughout the game, there is actually a decent number of enemy models, and there are thankfully no recolors to be found. Similar enemies do have differences in their designs, such as the goblins getting more armor and even shields, which they do use in combat. Where it falls down is that many enemies share sound effects, which negates the impact that the varied models have. And I don't mean between similar monster types. These flying egg creatures, swordfish, and goblins all use the same sound effects. Slightly larger creatures like the sword-wielding lizards and boar tigers also have the same sound effect. And yes, I know all these monsters have distinct names, but you'd have no idea what I was talking about if I used them. Areas are also very limited with how they are completed, usually requiring you to either find the end chest or assemble 3 keys to find the end chest, or just kill a boss monster. An aspect of areas we've not discussed yet are chim-chims. These non-aggressive monsters pop out throughout every area. You don't even fight with them. In fact, you're actively encouraged to kick them, as doing so will cause them to drop chim spheres. These are used for exceedingly few functions in the game, and most involve using them to open doors, as the spheres are a source of energy. This results in a weird and sadly tedious loop of reaching a door, kicking a bunch of chim-chims, and then moving on until the next door is found. Carry too many chim spheres and you're at risk of being attacked by chim-chim assassins, but these are dealt with almost as easily as regular chim-chims, so there's not really any risk. I'm not sure why they opted for this mechanic over something like a key hidden in a breakable object or a chest. It serves its purpose well enough, but it acts to slow the pace of moving through areas, something which is fine early on, but by the end of the game you just want to push through as fast as possible because you've seen and done it all already. Outside of the usual areas, there are also quests available. Quests are slightly more varied and will have unique rewards and character interactions during them, but they are very limited in number and many of them are necessary to complete to advance the main story, so it's not even like it's special optional content. Anyway, back to Haseo, Syllabus and Gaspard. They guide Haseo through the basics, despite Haseo protesting that he already knows it all, and head into the temple to claim the treasure. There, they're ambushed by Bordeaux and her two lackeys who are bitter and angry after their previous defeat at the hands of Haseo. With Haseo reverted back to level 1, he, Gaspard and Syllabus are swiftly defeated, and in a moment of strange sexual tension, something begins to awaken in Haseo.
Wait a minute. What the? Something is starting to... It's growing.
Hold it.
No, not like that. The trio are rescued by the appearance of a permanently scantily clad woman called Pi, who apparently has subscribed to the Korean MMO mantra of female armor. The less it covers, the more armor it provides. Pi scares off the three would-be PKers and offers to help Haseo, warning him that there is something dangerously powerful hidden inside his character. Thoroughly confused, but thankful to be alive, the three head back into town and part ways. There, Haseo bumps into Adelie again, who recognises Haseo even though his character looks different after being de-leveled. Adelie is determined to convince Haseo that Moontree's way of dealing with the PKers is the best solution, and invites Haseo to an area with her to level up, and learn more about the guild. After clearing the area, Adelie runs off claiming to have heard a sound that she wants to investigate. Behind the temple, they discover another sign from Tri-Edge carved into the rock and glowing. Upon approaching, they're dragged into an underground area called the Lost Grounds that shouldn't normally be accessible, and they see a strange person sitting under a glowing tree. When Adelie attempts to approach, the mysterious figure walks away, and a strange energy begins to coalesce from dark bubbles. When it appears, Adelie faints, and Haseo rushes to her side as the monster launches an attack. The pair are saved by the timely arrival of yet another stranger, who warns them to get back and then activates a strange power called Magus. This causes the stranger to transform along with the world around them, and the two figures begin to fight. The stranger wins without too much apparent difficulty, and the world returns to normal. Adelie wakes back up again, having conveniently missed the entire fight, and the stranger introduces himself as Kun, a member of the CC Corporation, the company that made the world. Haseo questions what the giant puppet-like entity was that Kun fought with, to which Kun remarks that it's unusual that Haseo was able to see it, and that it is called an avatar. Additionally, because Haseo could see it, this means that Haseo could also learn to use one himself, revealing what Pi was referring to during their earlier encounter. Kun wraps things up by inviting Haseo back to their guild, Raven, along with the lure of information about Tri-Edge. Heading back to town, Haseo heads straight to Raven Guild, and we're introduced to the members Kun and Pi, who we have already met, and their guildmaster, Yata, who appears to be an admin of sorts for CC Corp. They explain that their purpose is to investigate game bugs from within the game, and at the moment they are investigating IDAs, Artificial Intelligence Data Anomalies, which is exactly what we encountered in the underground lake. Both Kun and Pi are able to use avatars, making them something called epitaph users, and these avatars are able to use an ability called Data Drain to safely extract and contain an IDA, preventing it from causing damage to the game world. Yes, the same Data Drain ability that Tri-Edge used on Haseo to reset him to level 1, and presumably the same ability that sent Shino into a coma, implying that Tri-Edge may also have the ability to use an avatar. Haseo agrees to helping out Raven in exchange for information about Tri-Edge. The first order of business will be learning to use and control his avatar. Before heading out with Kun and Pai, we do a bit of busy work helping Canard stock and then man a guild-run store due to Gaspard getting lost while shopping for supplies, and we're introduced to Sakubo, a character that is shared between a brother and sister. It's a nice nod to the reality of families sometimes being unable to afford multiple copies of a game and siblings having to share. Store looked after, Haseo heads out to an area with Kun and Pai where it's revealed that the ability to use and control avatars is linked to two things. The first is their accounts. Known as Epitaph users, these are special accounts created originally by CC Corp for a past project that then got brought over into the world. The second thing needed is strong emotions and control over them. Haseo is confused by how emotions could possibly exist in the digital world, but plays along anyway. However, even after clearing the area of monsters, Haseo is unsuccessful in awakening his avatar. Returning to town, he meets with Gaspard and Syllabus, who reveal that thanks to his help with the market store earlier, they'd like him to become the Canard Guildmaster, an honour that Haseo begrudgingly accepts. Becoming the Guildmaster gives Haseo access to the guild-run store, giving you the ability to list items for sale for higher prices than you would receive from various shops. And secondly, you get access to the Steam Bike, a fast-moving and difficult-to-control vehicle that can be used in towns in some areas, as well as being able to initiate fights by ramming into enemies. It sounds fun, but I ended up barely using it, as it was rather unwieldy, and considering the short load times to get on and off the bike, simply running between places was usually faster. It's a shame, because it could have been a neat little reward. At this time, it's announced that a new area is beginning to open up again, called Lumina Cloth, a town that is home to the arena, a place for organised PvP battles. Excited, the trio head over to watch the first match, which will feature the reigning arena emperor, Endrance. This is a special occasion as Endrance doesn't engage in any activities in the world outside of the arena. Watching the fight, Haseo recognises Endrance from the underground lake where he and Adelie were attacked by an Ida. To Haseo's surprise, Endrance uses an avatar to win the fight with ease. After the match, Haseo goes to confront Endrance about his power and vows to defeat him in the arena, knowing that battling him is likely the only way to be able to converse with him and uncover the link between Endrance and the Ida. Endrance mocks Haseo, saying that even though he can see his avatar, he's currently too weak to do anything about it. Syllabus agrees to help Haseo, but Gaspard backs out, not being a fan of arena matches and commenting that a healer would be a better fit for the party. And who do we know that is a healer that might be available? Adelie, of course. But she's part of a guild that is anti-PKers, and arena fights are basically organised PK fights, so it seems like a long shot. Regardless, Haseo invites Adelie on an adventure, and while there, she comments on how many different players in the world have their own reasons for playing the game, and find their own ways of enjoying their time in the world. Adelie reveals that she suggested they go to this area simply because it's one of the few that actually has a small field of flowers, showing her more carefree and relaxed nature. However, all of this conflicts with Haseo's own views on the world, which have been distorted due to his initial experiences of betrayal and his best friend falling into a coma. The two end up arguing, and Haseo yells at her, telling her to leave and never show her face again. Having failed to find a healer for their team, Haseo reports the failure to Syllabus, who suggests creating a post on the forums. This is a great time to mention that the game features both official and unofficial forums, all split into different categories and topics, with multiple characters leaving comments and adding to discussions. It all feels very natural, including the way you log out of the world to access the official site news and forums, and then after exiting the game and returning to the system menu, you're able to access everything else. Unfortunately, I didn't have the time to read through everything that's available. You could spend literally hours reading through all the discussions and lore. It's a wonderful touch and really adds to the immersion of the game universe. What I wasn't such a fan of though, is how the email system links into the flow of the game. There were many times that you'd clear an area, then be prompted to log out and check your emails. Your emails then prompt the next story segment. Go do that and then check your emails for another prompt. Do that, and then check your emails again. So on and so forth. By the end of the game, it was starting to feel a bit like an email simulator. Luckily for Haseo and Syllabus, they get a response to their forum post, but they want to speak to Haseo alone. Knowing his past experiences with trusting other players, Haseo complies and heads in alone. What's the worst that could happen? It's not like Haseo's ever been betrayed before. Surprise, surprise, it's Bordeaux and her crew who are delighted to have successfully lured Haseo into a trap. Definitely didn't see that one coming. Haseo is luckily rescued at the last moment by Sakaki of Moontree Guild, who was asked to head in after Atali saw Haseo going in alone. Sakaki instructs Bordeaux to leave Haseo alone, as he's a friend of the guild and by proxy under their protection. Bordeaux reluctantly agrees, but only because she knows that Haseo plans to enter the arena tournament and they will end up fighting there anyway. After the discussion, Atali informs Haseo that she knows he's looking for a healer and wants to join his party despite their earlier disagreement, saying that a lot of it stems from her past experience of always losing, leading her to avoid combat in all forms and to harshly judge those that enjoy it. Determined to expand her horizons and hopefully taste victory for the first time, she offers to join Haseo and Syllabus in the arena. Now, personally, I'm not a huge fan of this character shift. It feels to me like Atali is too much of a people pleaser, and given how harshly Haseo treated her previously, she would have walked away and never spoken to him again. After all, that's what most reasonable humans would have done. However, plot must happen for plot reasons, so here we are. While we've covered a decent chunk of the plot so far, this section only takes a few hours of game time to complete, and so far we've only been fighting monsters in various areas. Now that we've formed our team, we can head into the arena, and for this section of the story, Team Haseo's climb to the top to fight Endurance makes up the vast bulk of the rest of the game. If you enjoy tournament arcs in shonen anime, then you'll likely have a good time here. For people that like some variety to their gameplay, you're out of luck. Starting at the bottom, Team Haseo first needs to accumulate enough points to even be able to enter the tournament. The easiest way I found to do this was through survival battles, 5 fights in a row with increasing numbers of points awarded for each consecutive battle. Arena battles function slightly differently to normal ones. For starters, healing magic is only half as effective as normal, so remembering to block can be quite important. The biggest change though is that your weapon arts are no longer only useful for performing Rengeki attacks on weakened enemies. You can also use them to interrupt and block the skills of your opponents. This is somewhat risky though, as your opponent can also do the same to you. The goal of each battle is to defeat the opposing team's leader. That's the only way to win. No timer, no point system, just take down the leader. Fortunately, that works in our favour, as stun locking the opponent is still stupidly easy, so most fights are pretty simple to breeze through. Side note, despite what I said about Atali earlier, I do love how excited she and Syllabus are about getting their first arena victory. It is pretty cute. Good job game for making me like the characters. After the first fight, Haseo is alerted to a forum post regarding Tri-Edge. Following the threads leads back to the cathedral where Haseo and Tri-Edge fought. However, rather than encountering Tri-Edge, Haseo instead finds a rather eccentric character called Pyrrhus III. No clue who Pyrrhus the First or Second are, or why he's wearing that frankly ridiculous armor, but please say hello to one of the most useless characters. Every good anime needs someone to be the butt of all the jokes to add some comedy to the story, and Pyrrhus III is exactly that for .hack. All we need now are beach and hot spring episodes, and I think this will truly qualify as an interactive anime. Anyway, it turns out that Pyrrhus is also tracking Tri-Edge because he's a graphic designer for the world and is appalled by the permanent scars that are left behind on his creations. A normal player shouldn't be able to do that, so there is definitely something unusual happening. You know, other than his ability to reset characters or send them into real-life comas, in-game graffiti is definitely the most heinous thing that Tri-Edge has done. Pyrrhus pledges to contact Haseo if he learns anything more about Tri-Edge, and with that, we can thankfully leave. A handful of arena fights later, our grind is interrupted again by a mysterious masked figure called Antares. They direct Haseo to a specific area, claiming it will be a valuable way to test his abilities and preparedness for the upcoming battles. And holy cow, I hated this area. Unfortunately, the exact reasoning why won't be clear just yet, but just trust me on this. The area itself isn't too bad. Essentially, there are a bunch of isolated islands that you use teleporters to navigate to, one at a time, slowly working your way to the island at the centre, whose teleporter will take you to the end of the dungeon. The annoying part is that along the way, at literally almost every step, Antares will interrupt you with a message telling you what you should do next. Well, thanks game for solving the first ever interesting puzzle for me. Even without the hints, it's fairly obvious what you need to do, as only some of the teleporters actually work. If you worked your way all around the outside ring, which you will need to do as you can only travel in a clockwise direction, the only island you won't have visited will be the one in the middle. It doesn't exactly take a genius to figure out that's where you need to go, but no, the game has to hold your hand so much that it basically just drags you to the finish line. Area completed, we head back to the arena for more grinding. After a few more fights, Team Haseo successfully qualifies for the real tournament, only for tragedy to strike. While Haseo, Syllabus and Atli have been off fighting, Gaspard has been cheering them on from behind the scenes in between manning the guild store. However, Bordeaux and her cronies, unable to target Haseo, have chosen to target Gaspard, bullying him and bad-mouthing the guild to other players, resulting in people actively avoiding the store altogether. In an emotional scene, Gaspard breaks down, confessing to the rest of the Canard Guild that he's on the verge of quitting the game as it's no longer fun to him. This somewhat shocks Haseo as he's witnessing real player emotions in-game and can no longer deny that emotions can be felt in the game world. Knowing that Bordeaux is the cause of all this, Haseo goes with Kuhn, an ex-member of Bordeaux's guild, Kestrel, to discuss it with their guild leader, Gabi. During the confrontation, at the prompting of Gabi, they agree that if Haseo can defeat them in the tournament, they will leave the Canard Guild alone forever. Before the first round begins, there's a special event quest available which would allow Haseo to awaken his class and unlock its full potential. This involves heading into an area which, according to forum posts, is causing quite a lot of difficulty for fellow players. Arriving in the area, it turns out this is the same one that Antares sent Haseo to earlier. Exactly the same. It's bad enough that the game reuses the exact same area, but the puzzle is also unchanged, as are the enemies. And even though Antares is no longer helping us, guess what? Haseo brings up all the same messages at the same times and places that they originally happened. So this is, for all intents and purposes, the exact same dungeon. But with only Haseo this time, so you can only do 1/3 of the damage output that you could previously, meaning this time it takes much longer to complete. Yeah, in case you can't tell, I was not a fan of this. But, thankfully, it's the only time that the game directly reuses an area in this way. Completing the area gives Haseo a much needed boost, along with the ability to wield greatswords and a cool new look to match. He still doesn't look like he did at the beginning of the game though, implying that there may be more class changes to come. Returning to the Canard Guild, Syllabus apologises, saying that he won't be able to join the fight as he needs to look after Gaspard. So, with the odds against them, Haseo and Atli head back to Lumina Cloth for the first tournament battle and to take down Bordeaux. Even though this fight is fairly easy and definitely winnable, it's interrupted partway through with an animated cutscene. Contrary to the gameplay, Haseo is losing, and spurred on by the desire to win for the sake of his friends rather than himself, Haseo calls upon the power of friendship. Or, in this case, the overwhelming desire to win at any cost. Haseo is finally able to summon his avatar, Skaith, and promptly decimates Team Bordeaux. Amidst this, Atli calls out for Haseo to stop, sensing something dangerous. Having won the fight, Haseo is delighted, perhaps a little too much, with his newfound power. He's then confronted by Kuhn and Pai, who warn him to never use an avatar against regular players, reminding him that avatars have the data drain ability and he could accidentally send players into a coma just like Tri-Edge did. Additionally, because they're fueled by emotions, it's entirely possible for the avatar itself to take over control of the player's actions and even cause the user to be data drained. I like this as a concept, as it prevents every single fight from devolving into an avatar battle and means they will only be used at appropriate times. There's a real sense of risk to using an avatar in battle, one that Haseo appears to completely fail to understand. Having won the first battle and awakened his avatar, Haseo is summoned back to the Raven Guild to speak with Yata. He's then sent on a mission with Pai to test out his control of his avatar by destroying some small Idas that have been detected in an area. Heading here, we get to fight using our avatar for the first time, and, well, these are basically mech battles. you're permanently locked onto your target and have access to a dodge, a melee attack, and a ranged attack. And in a nutshell, you need to use the ranged attack to break through your opponent's shields, then land a melee combo. Once their health bar is drained, you'll enter a second phase that involves dodging attacks while charging up data drain to land a final blow. If you take too much damage, your opponent might use data drain against you, prompting you to button mash to reduce the incoming damage. These fights go on for a bit longer than it feels they should, but overall aren't too bad. The mission we're on with Pi requires us to hunt down 4 Idas that have been spotted here, and I was excited to have some new mission variety introduced. Sadly, this is the only time you'll get to use your avatar outside of the main story fights. So much for that added variation. Pi and Haseo spot the final Ida moments before it attacks 2 unsuspecting civilians, and to protect them, Pi throws herself into harm's way, quickly being overtaken by the Ida, which then takes control of her avatar. Haseo activates Skaith and does battle against Tarvos, eventually landing a data drain, capturing the Ida and saving Pi. Upon returning to Mak Anu, Haseo is invited to the home of the Moontree Guild, where it's revealed that one of the bystanders Haseo and Pi saved was actually the leader of the guild. After a bit of discussion, it's noted that Sakaki is leading a faction against the current leader of the Moontree Guild, claiming that he's nothing more than a figurehead and that Sakaki is the true leader of the guild. This is a nice moment, as up until now, Sakaki has been a very straight and narrow goody two-shoes character that Haseo despised and wanted to punch in the face. But now, knowing that he indeed has ulterior motives, we feel that Haseo might have the right idea after all. A few more tournament fights later, Haseo is invited to an area by Pyros III where a new tri-edge symbol has been discovered. Pyros decided to lie in wait and ambush Tri-Edge, but has no idea how long that could take, so not wanting to hang around for an unknown length of time, Haseo leaves. Returning a second time, Haseo witnesses Sakaki bringing Atali to the wall, who claims she can hear something in the area but isn't sure what. We're not sure why this wall is important or what Atali is hearing, but we do know that Sakaki is acting very suspiciously. In the tournament finals, Team Haseo is pitted against his friends and fellow members of the Raven Guild, Pi and Kun, along with his self-imposed mentor and former Arena Emperor, Antares. As before, the fight itself is fairly easy to win, however as soon as the cutscene starts, it's clear that you were meant to be losing. Flying into a rage, Haseo calls upon his avatar, Skaith, and Kun calls upon his avatar, Magus, to counter him. The two do battle and Haseo has the upper hand. However, his delight turns to fear as he realizes that he's lost control of Skaith and is forced to stand by and watch as Skaith goes on a rampage, pummeling Kun and Magus repeatedly. Skaith hits Magus with data drain and Haseo fears that he may have unwittingly sent one of his few allies into an early coma. Luckily, Magus has used its special ability, Propagation, just in time and Skaith's attack was essentially nullified. With no strength left, Kun forfeits the fight, meaning that Team Haseo are now into the grand finals against Endurance. Right, we're almost at the end of the game, and this is where we'll do a spoiler warning for what it's worth, especially considering that there are going to be 2 and a bit more games reviewed that will build on this one. But, for what it's worth, if you want to avoid spoilers, please go to the timecode on screen. So, the fight against Endurance takes place in 2 parts, as you might have anticipated. The first portion of the fight is very straightforward and Endurance is surprisingly weak. Part 2 begins when Endurance activates his avatar, Maka. Endurance spouts some cryptic nonsense throughout the fight, insinuating that he's fighting on behalf of someone else, but protestations aside, Haseo wins the fight. In doing so, it's revealed that Endrance's cat is actually an Ida, which appears to escape amidst the confusion. After the tournament concludes, Team Haseo are crowned the victors and everyone heads to a nearby island to celebrate. During the festivities, Ovan appears and has a conversation with Haseo and Atali, revealing to Atali the truth about Shino, partially explaining Haseo's behaviour towards her due to the uncanny resemblance. Atali, upset by the realization that Haseo might not even see her as Atali but as Shino's replacement, runs off, leaving Haseo to chase after her. On the way, Haseo receives an urgent message from Yata and is forced to make a short detour from his search for Atali. During the meeting with Yata, it's revealed that Atali is also an epitaph user capable of summoning her own avatar. This is a reveal that feels, well, it feels forced. Let me explain. The first time we encountered an Ida and an avatar, Atali fainted, so she missed the whole thing. The second was when Haseo activated Skaith for the first time and Atali called out for him to stop. We assumed at the time that it was because she could either sense danger or saw that Haseo looked like he was losing control, but maybe it was because she could see Skaith. Then there was a third encounter with Haseo and Kun. Atali was there the whole time but didn't comment on it. And the same thing happened with the fight against Endurance. So either Atali can see avatars and she simply hasn't been talking about it, which feels pretty weird, or she can't see avatars and somehow just knew when to call out to Haseo. Neither explanation is great, but maybe this will be explained later. While Haseo is chatting with Yata, Atali has returned to the tri-edge symbol at the strange wall. She reaches out to touch it and is forcibly teleported to a strange white area with a row of lockers. Haseo, Pai and Kun race after her, also using the now glowing tri-edge symbol to teleport. After a short cutscene, combat begins, and this is actually a decently challenging fight. It was one of the few occasions where I was forced to use healing items to stay alive, mostly because Tri-Edge has a combo attack that would deal a little over half your health in damage. The most frustrating aspect of this fight though was being forced to use Kun and Pai as allies. We spent so much of our journey to this point with Atali and Syllabus, leveling them up, equipping them with high-end gear, and we don't even get to use them during the final fight. That's pretty disappointing. Once sufficiently injured, Tri-Edge goes into a rage and activates his avatar. Well, kind of. It's not that he activates his avatar, it's more that he seems to become his avatar. Or maybe he is an avatar, it's not really clear. Either way, Haseo calls upon Skaith and the final fight begins. This plays out as any other avatar fight, just with slightly more annoying to dodge attacks. Break the shield with range attacks and then swoop in for the kill. After landing Data Drain, everyone is returned to the white area where Tri-Edge begins to crumble and fall apart. Haseo desperately tries to get answers from him about how to bring back the lost ones, but Tri-Edge blows up before providing any answers. A moment later, the row of lockers begin to rumble and then slam open. What appears to be an Ida launches out of the lockers and infects Atali, causing her to cry out in pain before collapsing to the floor. Kun, Pai and Haseo race to her side and then the credits roll. They pulled a Final Fantasy VII on us. Let me begin by saying that .hack GU Rebirth took me about 18 hours to finish, which is one of the longest playtimes for a game on this channel so far. However, as far as most JRPGs go, that's actually relatively short, considering that many can take 50 to 100 hours to complete, or more. The game itself is around $65 Canadian, which would make this first part around $18.50, and this feels about right for the experience. You could get quite a bit more playtime out of this if you wanted to, continuing to level up and exploring the random dungeons to find more and more loot. Whether or not you choose to do so is totally up to you, but keep in mind that the adventure obviously doesn't end here. When you finish playing the game, you're informed that the seeker was able to import the save data of a cleared game into the next one, preserving your weapons and armor, items, and stats. This means that any effort you've put in won't be wasted, but keep in mind that leveling up will likely be easier in the second game, which will be tailored to your level. Unfortunately, you're not likely to feel inclined to do any extra leveling, as playing through Rebirth manages to feel like a drag more often than not, mostly due to the repetitive dungeons, mindless combat, and reused enemy assets. There are multiple other small frustrations that all build on top of each other, creating a situation akin to a death by 1000 paper cuts. It often feels like for every one thing the game does right, it gets another wrong. Here are some examples of what I mean. Good. Because the game features so many other players wandering around the world, the devs use this to the fullest by allowing you to trade with them, and they often have valuable items. Bad. There is no way to trade items between party members other than by using the trade function, or by directly gifting them to the character. This means you can't just take items back without trading something else for it. Good. There's a fairly extensive item upgrade system called Alchemy that allows you to combine similar items together to make upgraded versions. Bad. This is only used for items, not armor or accessories, and as far as I could see, only ever gives a percentage damage increase. No other stat boosts, skill unlocks, extended weapon combos, nothing. Good! You have an optional method of getting around, the steam bike, and it's given to you for free as part of the plot, and it can be used to ram into enemies. Bad! The steam bike is awful to control and is more difficult to land sneak attacks on enemies than normal sneak attacks, and using it is a requirement for the Canard Guild book, so you'd better get used to it if you're a completionist. Good! There are skill arts that allow you to perform powerful abilities unique to the weapon you have equipped, and they can be used to interrupt enemy skills and spellcasts. Bad! There are only 4 per weapon, and at least for the twin daggers, they are all a slight variant on deal more damage. No positional bonuses, ranged attacks, or even debuffs. Just use the one that does the most damage. Good! Introduce a new combat style through the introduction of avatar battles and showcase them being used in an area as a different mission type. Bad! Only use this idea exactly once during the entire game. I think you get the point. The main driving force for the game is the story, the world building, the characters. The characters vary from very interesting and relatable to outright annoying. I get that not everyone can be likable, but you just have to look at the likes of BioWare to see that it's definitely possible. The story does take an unfortunate amount of time to really become interesting. The early game is the section that is the most likely to put people off, simply because you've got a bare-bones story with bad voice acting and terrible pacing, and with simplistic combat and level design. It's a shame because, in my opinion, the story does ramp up and become fairly interesting in the second half. It makes me think that the best way to approach this is to actually consider it as an anime with gaming segments, rather than a game with anime segments. I'm genuinely curious now to see where the story goes. Will Atali be okay, or like Aerith from Final Fantasy VII, is she actually dead? Why is Sakaki trying to take over Moontree Guild, and will he be successful? Who was Tri-Edge, and where did the Idas come from? What is Yata hoping to get from all of this? And what's the deal with Ovan? I sincerely hope that the game manages to bring all of these plot threads to a satisfying conclusion by the end of the series, otherwise I may have to retroactively adjust my game ratings, because so much of the enjoyment of this game depends on your connection to and investment in the story. The gameplay elements, the exploration and combat, are there to support the storytelling rather than be the main attraction. They're fine, they're capable, but they're not the main attraction. And when you frame it that way, I think it becomes much more palatable. So, do I think that this game is amazing and helped evolve the genre and standards by taking ideas from classic JRPGs in a new direction? No, I don't think that it did. Not even close. But it has some unique ideas, like the overall setting and plot, the word building system for areas, and the mech-like avatar battles, but it's ultimately overshadowed by more complete experiences that were released years earlier. Would I still recommend it though? Yes, I would, but after setting the expectations correctly. If you're going into this expecting an expansive JRPG with tons of exploration and a well thought out, balanced and engaging combat system, you'll be disappointed. If you go in expecting a relatively shorter, more story-focused experience with some combat and exploration filler, then you'll be pleasantly surprised. It's definitely no Final Fantasy X, but although it seems to have drawn inspiration from it, it's not trying to replicate it. It's got gameplay that ranges from competent to subpar, reinforced and elevated by some great storytelling, resulting in a somewhat mediocre overall package that does enough to leave me curious about what is coming next, and how, if at all, they will evolve what they've started with as they move from one game to the next. All things considered then, my final rating for .hack//GU Rebirth is Gaspard out of 10. A bit annoying at times, but overall a lovable character that just wants to have fun. Now if you excuse me, I need to log out and check my emails. Welcome to the end of the video. A massive thank you to all the channel members on screen for supporting the channel, and especially our two Knights of the Holy Grail, Freaky Feline and Tom X. If you'd like to become a member, you can do so for as little as $1 per month. Just click the join button to see the available membership levels and perks. Thank you for joining me on this weird gaming adventure through the depths of Steam, and I'll see you next time in part 2 of the Dot Hack series. Until then, take care.